Hi, my name is Ken Davidian. Welcome to Season 1, Episode 8 of Organization Theory in Space. This video series is based on the Oxford Handbook of Organizational Change and Innovation, second edition, edited by Marshall Scott Poole and Andy Van de Ven. Today we'll be getting an overview of the last major part of the handbook, simply entitled Reflections. In this episode, we'll cover the last 5 chapters of the handbook that look back at the previous 31 to provide a review of all the material we've discussed in previously in our videos. So let's get started. Chapter 32 starts by presenting 2 enduring ideas in organizational scholarship, namely that change programs don't produce change because they fail most of the time, and that all change is met by resistance. By observing that change and resistance are neither good nor bad, that change is not an event but a process, and that different perspectives determine how situations are perceived, the authors say change can be perceived as an organization's state of stability, and that resistance is actually resilience. Chapter 33 talks about organizational life being complex, fluid, and full of contingencies. The discussion we saw in chapter 27 about change as a series of events or as a continuous process is revived here with some different terminology. The author introduces a performative perspective, talking about how organizations change and react to stimuli from within and outside the organization. The performative perspective results in more introspective understanding of organizational change and of emergence of change. The author then draws connections of the performative perspective to earlier chapters in the handbook. In chapter 34, the author asks 3 questions about the dialectic models and theories. The first question is, what scholarly traditions and models are most comparable to dialectics and amenable to their possible synthesis? The answer is that it depends on what is emphasized in defining the dialectic perspective. The second question asks, how can dialectics be made most relevant to contemporary phenomena? Practical application of dialectic theory is addressed in chapters 3 and 12. An interesting concluding response to this question is that the assumption of pluralism is often inconsistent with reality, as oppositional voices encouraged by power holders encourage folks to exit the organization. The last question is, who benefits? This question continues the discussion of critical management studies and asks if dialectic theory can be used to challenge the traditional power structure. Chapter 35 discusses how the author assessed the contributions of the different theories in the handbook using 3 criteria: validity, utility, and generativity. Next, the author evaluates how each chapter ranked on what the authors were asked to contribute in the areas of the current state of research, concrete descriptions and examples, and identified principles of change based on research. Ultimately, the results of this assessment provide lots of room for improvement for the 3rd edition of this handbook. The last chapter of this handbook, chapter 36, discusses 3 different views or orientations of change resulting from external stimuli or exogenous change, and change resulting from internal stimuli or endogenous change. The first view considers the 2 types of change as being totally different. The second view explicitly assumes the differences to be analytical only, but implicitly the same. The third view explicitly states that endogenous and exogenous change are the exact same thing, and this is the entangled view. After identifying which of the relevant chapters take which of these 3 views, the authors suggest that scholars don't really need the first 2 perspectives because it blinds us to connections across categories and time. So, since these are all overview chapters, they all end up at the top of our hierarchy chart. I've relabeled that echelon to include overview and reflections. I'll ask you a little later on whether or not you think I filled in this chart correctly. I'm not 100% sure I did, so I'm asking you to check my work. So that's it for this final episode of OT in Space. But before I go, I want to mention how in the first episode, I talked about how season 1 was just going to cover the major sections, and that's what we've done. But season 2 is going to include 1 video per chapter. And you can let me know which chapters you want me to produce first and put that in the comments section below. There's no reason I need to do the chapters in numerical order. However, I did mention back at the beginning of the series that I was going to ask you a bunch of other questions that you could respond to in the comments section below. These questions are the following. Which of the four ideal motors of change were most interesting to you and why? Did I incorrectly place any of the handbook chapters on the hierarchy chart? And if so, where do you think they belong and why? Can you provide other ideas of how the handbook chapters relate to the space sector? I provided some thoughts for those chapters, but what are your ideas? Finally, what chapters did you find most interesting and why? So that's it for season one of OT in space. I hope you liked the content. And if you did, please hit the subscribe button and the notification bell so that you won't miss a thing when the second season starts being released. Thanks. OT in Space is produced by Impossible Research, LLC. Impossible Research, or IRL, mainly conducts process research on the topics of innovation and industry emergence within the context of commercial space industries. IRL also offers research consulting and STEAM outreach. This video is intended for educational purposes only.